Hey guys and girls, Poketing King here, back with another video. Today is the topic of graded cards. So we're going to talk about how you submit, how you choose to go with, and kind of the options that you have with different grading companies, and my experiences with all of them. And then we'll talk a little bit about middleman and selling direct and things like that. So obviously you've got the main three, which is PSA, BGS, and CGC. So obviously PSA have the red and white label, which you have here, and we'll go through a little bit into detail more. But here's the red and white label, as you know, very familiar. If you're talking about grading cards, it's probably the most familiar that you're going to see. Now, PSA have evolved and adapted a lot over the last few years. So you are able to actually, when you get your submissions, the cards are automatically HD scanned onto their website. So if you scan the barcode, you can see HD scans of the front and back of the cards. Within their app as well, you can also edit them as well. So if you want to post on social medias, I think this makes it a really good way, not only of like actually sharing your slabs, but also when you're looking at selling them, you can have HD scans of them, which is great. And you can have a database, and you can have rankings and set up sets as well. So if you're a Mew collector, you can do like Mew, and you can see how you rank in the world, which I think is really great. PSA slabs now probably aren't the thickest compared to some of the other counterparts, some of the rivals, but they are known for having very slim and sleek slabs. Now they are actually changing the slabs, and they are actually going to be having grading notes moving forward. I know that they've touched on it with sports now, but it's going to be a process that they're going to roll out over the next couple of years, where you'll be able to have some notes on it. Now, with PSA, obviously, they don't offer subgrades like the other companies do. So you've got BGS as well, aka Beckett. Beckett is, the oldest. They've been established for a very long time, just like PSA have, and they generally have the gold. Or you have the black label, and then you have the silver as well. You used to have white, but I believe they removed that for just silver, gold, and black. So you do have subgrades. You have centering, corners, edges, and surface. And the idea is obviously you want to get as high on all of those as possible to try and get the highest grade. Now, with Beckett, you can see the subgrades, which makes it really good. You can see all the points that have been mentioned on it. The problem with Beckett, I have found, is they generally have been a lot slower than PSA. So PSA, for me, if I'm submitting in the UK, I'm not in the US, I'm having to use a middleman. And generally, 2 to 3 months for the lowest tier is what I have kind of received over the last few years. Obviously, there's delays, in the past, during the boom and stuff. But Beckett seems to be a little bit slower than that. Now, PSA are the quickest, I think, out of the main top 3. For their bulk service. But obviously you get the subgrades with Beckett. Now Beckett, as I said, is a very old company as well. They're very established. They have the market. But I'm going to post up some photos here of the last couple of months of the pop reports. So you can see how many cards are being graded in the TCG category as well as normal for these 3 companies, as well as SGC, which I don't own a slab for. So Beckett is another option. Obviously, you get the subgrades, as I mentioned, you don't get with PSA. Now, PSA is generally being used a lot for Pokemon, whereas traditionally Magic the Gathering, One Piece, Flesh and Blood, some other card games have been used with Beckett, because having the subgrades, is something that a lot of people really like, myself included. And then you've also got CGC. So you can get subgrades with CGC as well. I own 2 slabs, which are CGC. They're both Magic, but this is a standard non-subgrade CGC slab. Obviously, the CGC are known for grading comic books, and they entered the market into grading trading cards a couple of years ago. Obviously, when graded cards got absolutely mental and there was a boom, and CGC established themselves in the market. Now, CGC generally, a lot of their slabs don't go for as much as Beckett and PSA, but they have been known to grade a lot of error stuff, which has resulted in the past with some fakes going through, as it has done with all companies. But CGC seem to be under the spotlight a little bit more sometimes. Now, CGC is not an option that I personally would use. It's not really... I don't think there's that premium that you get with Beckett and PSA. Now, I think turnaround times are pretty good again with CGC, similar to PSA. And you see a lot of bulk slabs sent in CGC because I think they've done specials in the past where it's like $10, which is extremely cheap. So obviously, if you don't want to use maybe a local grading company, but you still want to use a company that is established and trusted, CGC is a company that people have used. And then another one I want to talk about is PCG. PCG are a relatively new company. Obviously, Premier Card Grading. This is an example of one of their slabs. I think PCG have the best of both worlds, and I'm thinking if you look at the slabs of all three, I think PCG slabs are by far the nicest. They're a little bit more protection than PSA slabs, but they're not as bulky as Beckett. That sleek black and gold, or the black and silver, works really well. I really like that, or the all gold as well. PCG are also actually grading on site in more countries than any of these companies. So PCG are operating from the US, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia. I believe it's in Malaysia. You've got Europe, in Germany. You've got the UK, and now you've also got Japan as well. So they've got multiple locations all around the world, whereas these other companies, they're only based in America, and I believe PSA also have a branch in Japan. So if you're around the world and you're looking at maybe not wanting to use a middleman and you just want to send in direct, then the chances are that PCG might be the better option for you. Now, every different grading company has their pros and cons. They also have specific card games seem to be tied with different grading companies. So as I said earlier, PSA generally has been known for Pokemon, Beckett for Magic. Yu-Gi-Oh kind of sways in between the both of those. But when you look at card games, like Weiss as well, I've seen that equal parts in PSA as well as, BGS. And you look at card games like Flesh and Blood. So Flesh and Blood are actually, in fact, partnered with PCG. It was started by Matt Rogers, who was a Flesh and Blood player. So if you go to events, some of the big events, PCG are there. They're either taking in submissions or they're actually grading on site, which I think is fantastic. I think that's an option that is quite rare, and I think in 2024, going into 2025, I think being able to drop off your cards and get them graded at the event is great. If not, you can just drop off the submission, and they'll sort of sort it out. The process is very easy as well. You just sit down with them. They've got the database that's got preloaded with all the cards anyway. I have actually used PCG to grade Flesh and Blood, Pokemon, Sorcery, and Yu-Gi-Oh as well. And I think the cards look really nice in there. Now, I personally, moving forward, would not be using PCG for Pokemon. I think PSA is always my preferential. I think the premium is there, and I think the red and the white just works. And obviously, a lot of my collection predominantly for Pokemon is in PSA slabs, and I think that's one of the leading factors for a lot of people. They want unity between their whole collection, so they want things to look the same. And if you've got different grading companies, I think sometimes that's something that bothers people. So for me, Pokemon, is PSA. But with PCG, Sorcery and, Flesh and Blood is 100% I'll only grade with PCG. The one that I would do with PCG. Now, the submission process for all of these companies are going to be very different. With PSA, if you're in the US, it's great. You can send direct. There's also a collector's membership where you can sign up. You get discounts as well. You get a magazine each month. And, being able to send direct is great. The same as Beckett, the same as CGC. And obviously PCG as well. Now, if you aren't inside the US, you're most likely going to have to use a middleman service. So in the UK, there are a couple of options that I would recommend. One being Collectible Power and two being Trust Grading. So Collectible Power is the choice that I personally use. There are a lot of the London card shows, a lot of the card shows you can drop off, as is Trust Grading as well. So Karam, who runs Trust Grading, he is a lot of the events as well, so you can drop off submissions. You can also pick up submissions as well. So if you don't want it going through the post, I understand with these expensive cardboard cards that are, vital parts of your collection as well, you might not want to trust the postal services. And I understand, there's damage and loss and stuff. So being able to pick up and drop off at these shows, I think is a fantastic option. And it really adds a layer of depth there. Now, there are other options you can use, but they're just the two that I know personally I'm comfortable talking about. There's been many in the past that have come and gone. There are others that exist out there, but I personally wouldn't want to advertise the company that I personally wouldn't use myself. Karam I know personally. I've known him for many years. And as I said, Collectible Power I've used for a long time as well. And I 100% trust both of those with, my shiny cardboard. So there are options you can use if you're in the UK. Obviously PCG as well for multiple locations around the world. You can drop off, submissions if you want, or you can ship to them, But there are obviously, there's a lot of events which I think really help. I think there's a lot of people that drop off submissions with each other, and there's a lot of deals being done, which I think is great. But there are a couple of the options that you have. Obviously, taking the time to think about what company you want to use to grade your cards ultimately is a truly personal experience and opinion. Everyone has their opinion. Some people don't like PSA slabs. Some people don't like the white and red. They think it's too simplistic. They're not a fan of not having subgrades. So they are more likely to choose, companies like Beckett, for instance. And as I said, the numbers will be here. It doesn't include PCG because they are relatively new. I think they are working on getting included into GemRate, but, it has the top 4 companies anyway for now. And you can kind of see the numbers of how many are getting graded. PSA are grading over 1 million cards a month, whereas companies like Beckett are maybe only grading about 30 to 50,000 a month. So there is a big difference. Obviously, consistency is another question. Consistency throughout a lot of these companies as well is a bit hard sometimes. I think with PSA and Beckett specifically, they've had a lot of issues over the years of consistency when PSA opened up their New Jersey branch. I know a lot of the bulk submissions were going through there, and there was a lot of issues with like the top right corners being dented. I personally experienced that myself, so much so that it was big enough that actually PSA did address it. Now, compensation and stuff like that is a difficult one, so to kind of get back, especially if you're using a middleman. But for the most part, these companies are obviously aware of there's inconsistent issues, and you can look at different certs. So obviously you've got the certs above all the slabs, like PSA and stuff, where you can see it here and it has the cert number. With PCG, the cert number is actually on the back with a QR code. But for PSA and Beckett, it obviously has the front, and there's generally a lot of information out there about kind of what certs can be a bit better and what worse. So PSA at the moment are probably close to the 10s. So the hundreds, whereas, companies like Beckett are, I think a little bit behind because PSA have caught up massively. And I wouldn't know about CGC personally and or PCG because I don't know if that information is kind of like published out there. But consistency obviously is another one as well. And your friends might use certain companies, and there are also local companies as well. In the UK, we have other companies like MGC as well, which I have used in the past and I had no issues at all. But obviously as wanting to have cards in similar slabs, and obviously, the only reason why I used them was because PSA was shut, and then when they opened again, I carried on using PSA. So a lot of it is just preference. It really comes down to that. I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer. As with anything, it's literally just preference. Obviously, you can weigh up the options when you're going to grade, but it really is just personal preference. And in terms of like grading and the grading market, it's massively inflated over the last few years, and I think a lot of people are reverting back to actually wanting to collect binders and raw again. I think there are a lot of people in the camp that are very sick of graded cards. Obviously, the premium they can increase, especially things like Black Label that increase a massive premium. And you look at like Raws versus PSA 10 and vice versa. There is a big premium on that because people want, the card. They want it as a 10. But a lot of the time you should be just buying the card and not the grade. Because, as I just said, especially with, these bigger companies, because they grade so much, are they going to be perfect every time? No. It is done by humans. There is human error that could be potentially involved. Obviously, you don't want to hear that when you're grading cards because you want, consistency. But, you can crack a PSA 9 and potentially get a 10. Beckett have a system in place where you can send cards in for a review, and they might mention some notes. I know a lot of the time people are very unlucky and they don't get any notes, but sometimes they do upgrade the slab. A lot of people have done that with 10s where there's like a 9 point, there's like a 1 subgrade off, and they want the black label. And you know, if you send it in enough times, potentially you have a chance of getting, you know, the black label. But you know, at least with Beckett and PCG, you can see the subgrades. Now, I have actually cracked slabs and sent them into different companies from other companies to see kind of what the consistency is like. And PCG obviously has different locations as well, so that's another option as well. Because there's different locations, the consistency is different. You know, it's again, that is a topic that can be discussed for the end of time. But when it comes down to grading, you know, I think just pick the cards that you want to grade. So when you're doing like a grading submission, you know, you want to be using semi-rigids, not top loaders. And it literally is just a sleeve and in a semi-rigid. So people sometimes use the tags, the colourful tags. I think a lot of them actually don't like it when you use that, from what I've heard anyway. Just because it, you know, I understand that it takes the card out easier, but you know, I don't think that's what they want. So obviously that's literally how I prepare my submissions. Just sleeves in the, you know, in the semi-rigids, and obviously pack carefully. And then anything where you got to put your order notes and stuff like that. Obviously protect the cards, you know, before getting graded. And you need to inspect the cards as well. Make sure you're not just sending cards for the sake of it. Obviously, if it's a childhood card or it's the card you just want graded and you're not worried about the, you know, the actual grade itself, and that's fine. But obviously grading can be very difficult. A lot of the time you'll hear people go, oh, this is definitely a 10. I don't know why it got a 10. Why I didn't get a 10, it got a 6. And you're like, okay, well, send some pics of the card. And there'll be like a dent on the back or something. You know, companies like PSA, if there's a dent on it, it's not going to get any higher than a 7. Obviously, you've got things like OC as well, so off-centered, which is another thing as well. You've got errors as well, which is another conversation. But grading can seem very complicated, but I think it is just simple as pick the cards that you want to grade, pick a company that you want to use, and then either send direct or pick a middleman. And obviously, if you're packaging up and you're sending the cards, as I said, sleeve in a semi-rigid, they're very cheap. You could pick them up for pennies. I would then bubble wrap that, put it in a box with paper around it or more bubble wrap, and then ship that out. You know, I would try to use the best postal service you can. So, for instance, I would be using special next day delivery in the UK. You know, you pay a little bit more premium, but I know it's going to get there the next day before 1 p.m. You know, and it's insured as well. And obviously you can add the amount of assurance. Now, if you're shipping international, that's another kind of like complication there, because, you know, there's an added risk. But if you're obviously dropping off at a event or you're dropping off actually at the grading company, then you kind of reduce that risk. So, you know, it's all really relative. But it's just a short video to kind of talk a little bit about grading. I want to do a video as well comparing raw to graded and kind of the difference that it does make. But this is just a short kind of how to grade. If anyone's got any questions, please comment below. I'm absolutely 100% happy to help. I have graded with PCG, I've graded with Beckett, I've graded with MGC, I've graded with PSA. I've been grading cards now for 6 years. So I've got quite a lot of experience with grading. So, you know, it's kind of all relative. But thank you all for watching. As always, please hit the links in the description below for like Tokyo Tree, Slab Sentinel. If you want supplies for grading, so Slab Sentinel, actually, I use their semi-rigids. I use their sleeves as well. I also use their graded card cases to store my graded cards. And obviously the sleeves as well that you have for these. I get those from Slab Sentinel as well. So if you use the code PTK, you can get a discount as well off all your orders. And it does help support the channel. And as always, have a great day.